We are live. Oh, light. All right, let's try that again. We are live. I like doing this thing from super close because the light makes the background really dark and it has a cool little contrasting effect. Actually, before we get started today, later today, I can explain this in front of the camera, that's fine. Later today, I don't know if you noticed, but on Fridays I've started doing this thing called Photo Friday. In another part of my life, I've taken up amateur photography and I've done there's been a lot of instances where I've like focused myself on taking pictures. I'm not great, but it's fun. And so what I've started doing is on Fridays, I'm releasing some of the photos that nobody has ever seen. Hashtag Photo Friday. So today's Friday. So I wanted to just talk about the photo that's getting released today and give you a little bit of the backstory, where it came from and what I saw and why I took the picture, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to show this, and I'm going to actually get behind the camera so I can make sure that you can see it right. There we go. This photo is called Papa. Sue and I like to go to the San Diego County Fair every year, and this past year, we went with, my family was in town for 4th of July or whatever it was. And so we all went there together. But while we were there, I saw this dad here, and he was walking, and I think this is his wife, and he had a couple of other kids here, but he was walking with this girl on his shoulder. And I took probably 15 shots from behind of them and just caught this one, which was perfect because the lighting in the background was amazing. The colors here made for really good contrast. And I love how she was just looking down to the side. Just so trusting of her dad. It was just a cool little experience. So anyway, I hope you check that out. You'll see a little bit later today. And now, coffee. All right, I think we're good to go on that. Let me actually make sure. Okay. Technical difficulties, people, sorry. Just want to make sure I'm actually in the frame. I like to stand in this little nook over here. All right, so today we're going to go back to those early days. Today is Infusionsoft, the early days, volume dose. Yesterday I realized we went through a lot. In the 2 days that I've been doing this, we've gone through a lot of stuff, and we haven't even hit 2005 yet. We're still in like the super, super early days. But today there's a lot of funny stories that are coming today and then on Monday as well. So we probably won't get much past 2005 until Tuesday or Wednesday of next week because there's so much fun stuff that happened back then. But we'll go back and we'll talk. And there's a couple of things that happened in the early days that I think only Brad and I and those of us that were there in the small number of us that were there actually knew about. But as we started to grow after me, so some of you know who Dave Lee is. Dave is the CEO of Plus This. Man, I can't get the names of these tools right. Co-founder of 6 Division, and he's now the founder and CEO of Plus This. If I remember correctly, he had been consulting with Infusionsoft in the early days before I started. He's a business school friend of Clay's, and then right around, it was probably 2, maybe 3 or 4 months after I started officially, we brought him on like full time. He moved from San Diego and came out there. And I remember the first time we had him on a conference call, and I just remember Clay saying something like, it was one of our Friday meetings. It was like, and we're really excited, and this is somebody that has been a long friend of mine, and he did some work for us. Apparently just the sound of my voice causes vibrations in this place and things just fall. So what happens when you got boxes everywhere because you're moving. Anyway, so Dave joined, and so was part of the team in the early days, and it took him, I think, 2 months or whatever to officially move himself all the way out, but then he came and joined us, and he helped to grow the company in a massive way that we would not have been able to do without him. But part of what happened during that phase, when Dave came on and as we started to grow the company, was we started expanding each of the individual departments. So at that time, we had Scott, who was like, so you have to forgive me, Scott, if you see this. I still have, I know that you have been integral and nobody's doubting the value at all, but as far as job titles and what you're actually doing, he's always been like a roving Where do we need him? Okay, he's going to go there because he can do everything. Reminds me a little bit of myself, or maybe I remind myself of him. Anyway, so I don't actually remember exactly what it was that he was doing. I think he was like marketing, and Clayt was doing all the sales, and then obviously Brad and I were in support, and then we had the development team. But at that time, we started to expand all of the departments. So we brought on, I believe the order was, and Cody, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the order was we brought on Cody Jones, who became like the definition of salesperson at Infusionsoft for a long time. And then we also brought on a series of people into the support department. There were some people that came and left that didn't fit, that didn't work out. So we got early taste of not everybody necessarily is going to be a good fit for a particular job. But there was one time we hired, the two next people that we hired in the support department after me were both named Bryce. So in the support department, if you called Infusionsoft support early 2005, you were talking either with Brad, Brett, Bryce, or Bryce. And I don't know if any of you have ever spoken on the phone with myself or Brad, but we sound identical on the phone. In fact, my dad can't even tell us apart. There was one time I called him and we spent 5 minutes on the phone, and he was talking about stuff that Brad would have understood, but I was like, Dad, do you know who this is? And he was like, yeah, it's Brad. And I was like, no, not Brad, it's Brett. We had a good laugh about that. But there was a time, like I said, when in the early days, that was when you called into support, that's what you got, Brad, Brett, Bryce, or Bryce. And we found in those early days that it was very important. Well, what we realized is that who they were talking to, we understood that it didn't really matter. But the customer got very confused. And so we had to come up with different ways to resolve that. And what ended up happening was it caused some initial friction at the beginning of those phone calls where there was just a little bit of confusion. That's just what it was. And so that was, I think, one of the solidifying things that got us to the point where we needed to get Brad off the front lines for the support calls, because not only does his name sound the same as the other three guys in support, but he and I sound identical, so you can never tell the difference. But also there were lots of instances where I would just lean into it. Like, I knew that it didn't matter who they were talking to. And so if they thought it was Brad and I are similar enough, and we would have said the same things anyway. So I kind of would lean into it. And that's actually been something that's stuck with me for a long time. Sometimes in situations where correcting the mistake would lead to more confusion than just going with it, I'll just go with it. Because I know that, at least for the duration of this conversation, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter who's on the other line. What matters is that the answer is being given. And because I was confident that I could give the same answers as Brad, because we were both, I mean, let's be honest, we were both new to Infusionsoft at that time. He was less new, obviously, but, we were both very, very new. So the difference in our answers wasn't going to be that drastic. Anyway, we got one of those Bryces that didn't end up sticking around for very long, and the other Bryce ended up moving and becoming a real junior developer because he actually had development experience. And so that problem was solved sort of on its own by other means. The one Bryce, I don't think he didn't understand some basic things, and it was taking him too long to figure it out. And then the other Bryce wanted to be in development anyway, so he moved over there. And then around that same time, and I know I'm messing up the order here when I get into this part, but around that same time, the Levitt brothers got brought in. And I believe Kyle came in first, and was doing biz dev type stuff, but he was also helping with like account management and sales a little bit. He kind of was sitting between Cody and the support department. I remember at that time, I spent a lot of time with Kyle, just helping him understand the software and the technical side of things, because being an account manager, and again, forgive me if I'm getting this all wrong, but this is how I remember it. Being an account manager, he needed to know enough about the software to be able to help his clients, to help the people that he was talking to. And so, no offense to Cody, but Cody did not have that same attitude. Cody, I think, preferred to not know how it worked, which was fine, because if any of you know anything about sales at Infusionsoft, you have to know Cody, He's like their top performer forever. There were some times at the very, very beginning when Dave and Cody were there where we started to feel the friction that always exists between sales and fulfillment. And because because the support department was also the implementation department, and also the training department, and also all of the departments that weren't development and sales, we were saddled with delivering everything that the sales team sold. And so, that friction that I think has to exist, not because it's healthy, but because there's no other way around. You can't make money without salespeople that were willing to sell. And so the fulfillment of those sales, this was the very, very beginning of my frustration. Well, a frustration that I had that I still continue to have, and I think a lot of people share, which is sometimes sales gets a bad rap because they are incentivized to close the deal and they're incentivized to toss in stuff. And on the fulfillment side, you're thinking, is that something that we do? I don't think that's something that we do. And yet, in order to close the deal, sales will make it happen. And especially in the early days, I think, looking back, I mean, obviously at the time I was like, seriously guys, I got to do all this stuff as well. I got to support clients and I got to build this guy's thing out and do all these other things. But in the early days, as I look back, I don't think that we would have expanded beyond where we were if we hadn't done that. If we hadn't been put in a position by sales to force ourselves to grow, but if we had been like, okay, let's let fulfillment determine what we're going to do in the future and what services we're going to provide and all this stuff. There is a necessity, I think, especially in the early stages of a business, especially in technology, where sales has to set the pace. Because growth, like Infusionsoft would absolutely 100% would not be where it is today, would not have expanded to the growth it's expanded to, the 3 rounds of capital funding. Absolutely, with no exceptions, would not have done that if we hadn't been pushed in those early days. Because we needed to expand. We needed to get into more markets. And you know what? The important thing is it's not even just about the money, not just about the revenue. That obviously is important. But the expansion into those other markets is, I think, what helped us realize, I look back and this is how I see it, it helped us to realize that there was a larger market for business owners than there was for mortgage professionals. Like, I think in those early days, as we started to bring on more of those Managed Pro clients, we started to, remember, our target demographic in the early days, as I remember it, was, man, I keep saying, I'm going to say this once and it's going to apply to everything that I say. This is all as I remember it. Remember, I was 17 at the time. So if I'm remembering things wrong, do like what Tara did yesterday and be like, I think you might be misremembering. And I'll be the first to say, yeah, probably. But this is how it went down. So back then, the primary product we were selling was to mortgage professionals, because we were finding the niche and we were being very, very specific about who we were talking to. But the more we started to expand and the more we started to deliver and the more we started to bring on new clientele and do more work for them in order to get them to buy into the software, because at that time, you would think Infusionsoft is complicated now. I said this yesterday, but man, I defy any of you to go back and use the original version of Managed Pro CRM. I mean, it made sense, but you kind of had to be related to the guy that wrote it to figure it out, which luckily we were. And I think at that time, I think that it's just based on a core principle that I'm realizing a lot now. In fact, it's driving a lot of what I'm doing now, which is in the early days, what you have is your time. And what you don't have is expertise, and what you don't have is data that speaks to exactly what you should be doing. And so you just got to sell whatever you can to as many people as you can until you figure out what is going to stick. Obviously, you stay in the same vein. Like, we weren't selling toilets. We were selling software that we had built, right? We were in that realm. But selling more of it and giving away things for the sake of selling more of it gets us in front of more people, which creates more experience, which then is fed back as qualitative data to the development team as well as to the management team and the visionary team to say, okay, this is where we're going to go now because we see an opening. We see where we're going to go. If we hadn't, though, if the pushback that we gave to sales at that time to, stop selling stuff that we don't offer or all these other things, if we had stuck with that and they had listened to us, no way we expand to the place that we are now, the place that Infusionsoft is now. I think that's a very important thing. But so we did that, and there was a necessity, a need to start bringing on more people in the support department. And this is about the time, early, like spring-ish, going into summer 2005, when we started to really expand into training more, like training and implementation and helping people actually implement, because we had made kind of the transition between between Mortgage Pro and Manage Pro around this time. And we're starting to focus a little bit more on the small business info marketer market, which was starting to explode with GKIC at the time. In fact, that was kind of where the market shifted to. We had mortgage professionals, because the original guy who, and I wasn't around for this part of the story, but the original guy who inspired the creation of what became Infusionsoft was a mortgage professional. I know nothing about the mortgage industry except that they're called mortgages. So he was a mortgage professional of some kind. And he said, the famous story is, I have pain. And he described to them the problem where he had sent an email to all of his customers offering them a discount on a product they'd already purchased. And he was like, I can't segment my list and all this stuff. And so they were like, let's build something for that. So they built Mortgage Pro, and they went after mortgage professionals because that's where the genesis was. That's where it originated. But then when they started to get a little bit deeper and more into the development of Manage Pro, and they started to get into the GKIC world, I remember multiple times Scott was listening to the GKIC tapes, to the Dan Kennedy stuff. I remember he had it in his car, and I know this because I borrowed his truck. He had a little Toyota, or a Nissan, I think it was, a little Nissan, old school 80s, late 80s, early 90s model Nissan stick shift truck that I borrowed from him, and the tape was still in the tape deck. And so I turned it on and I would listen to it. I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. That was my introduction to Dan Kennedy and GKIC way back then. I think it was the Renegade Marketer or something or other, the original tape version. Anyway, so that kind of shifted their focus, and they realized that there was more of a market in that world, and so Infusionsoft became more dedicated and more focused around small business. And again, you got to remember, this is 2004, 2005. Entrepreneurship had not hit its zenith, not even close. And so what they were doing at that time was groundbreaking. Like now, entrepreneurship is pretty mainstream. Just about everybody's got a side gig, right? Something that they're trying to do, something they're trying to build, some app they're trying to build. Back then, it was like, you get a job, period. Like entrepreneurship was not as sexy as it is today. But the fact that they had the vision and they caught onto the vision that GKIC had and some of these other people to drive them into that, I think is based on the fact that they were in the trenches, and we were forced to work very specifically with business owners to help them set up things and get things rolling in Infusionsoft so that we could build a customer base. And because we were so on the front lines, we were able to see where everybody was going. At least that's what I think. I think that the vision became clear the more we were actually working. And I attribute a lot of that back to us being sort of forced to succumb to the will of sales, so to speak. But I think even today, I remember for the longest time, we would have conversations in the support department, and I was frustrated, and I'd bring it up. We have to stop, selling stuff that we don't do. We got to only sell the stuff that we actually do. And it's like, I was upset and frustrated about it then, but looking back, I'm like, I'm grateful they didn't listen to me, because what did I know? So I think that was very, very valuable and very important. But around that same time is when we started to expand the support department into training and implementation. We brought on 5 people over the course of, how many was it? Let's see. So we had Jordan Hatch, who everybody that's in the Infusionsoft space should know that name. Jordan Hatch got brought on. He was, I think, after Cody, he was one of the next ones that we brought on. He was like the first junior support rep that was under me. I like to say under me, even though he quickly surpassed me in both skill, knowledge, and ability to help customers, which if you know Jordan, you'll know that that's absolutely the truth. But we were there, and then we had TJ Lorenzen joined the team, and then who else at that time? I know I'm missing like 7 people. I should just look at I have pictures from back then, which I'll have to start sharing, because maybe I'll do that for Photo Friday next week. I'll start sharing some of those pictures from back then. Clint Gardner, who was in product for a long time, and I think still is, was part of the support department. In fact, we had a, sorry, little side tangent, but this is funny. Around the summer of 2005, so July, August of 2005, this was the summer before I went and served my Mormon mission. And some of you may know I used to be Mormon, used to be pretty staunch into the church. And September of 2005, I left to go to the training center to go and serve a mission in Ukraine. Well, I knew about that going into the summer, going to the end of the summer of 2005. And so I bought a digital camera. And get this, this will date me totally. I bought a digital camera, and the camera was the front, like obviously it was just it wasn't like a cell phone, so it didn't have a front and back camera. But it was a tiny little thing. I think it was a Canon PowerShot, something or other. And it was the camera was a 1.2 megapixel camera. And I bought a 512 megabyte SD card for it. And that SD card cost me almost as much as the camera did. That was when this was, 2005. Digital cameras were really new. It was this tiny little box looking thing. And I bought it in the summer in preparation for going on that mission. And we brought it into the office a couple of times, and Clint went nuts. So in fact, some of those videos I should show, because those are probably some of the funniest things. Looking back, some of the things we did back then are hilarious. And in fact, on Monday, if I remember to, I want to talk about the story of when by the way, I didn't know this until several years later, but tell about the story of when I replaced the entire Infusionsoft homepage with a stupid video of me banging on a cup and some stuff with a stick. And I got to show that video and tell that story, because that's a lot of fun. But it was fun as we started to expand and started to broaden the horizons around who it was that we were working with and that was working with us. And we started to really develop a culture, because we had always, like I mentioned yesterday, we had always done like Friday meetings with the entire company. We always had been very close knit. I mean, when over 70% of the company is immediate family members, it's easy to be that way. But as we continued to grow, everybody that joined Infusionsoft back then seemed to fit into that groove. It seemed to fit into that mold. You know, everybody that was there, Kyle, and in fact, well, let me finish this and then I'll say that little anecdote, and then we can call it a day. It's a day, haha. Everybody sort of fit. So as we started to bring people in, I think in those early days, we started to realize how important it was that everybody understand the culture of Infusionsoft and buy into the culture of Infusionsoft. And we got lucky in the early days, because I think everybody just sort of fit that mold. And I think a lot of people can probably point to why, which we can talk about later. The fact that they were all returned missionary Mormon men. It's easy, again, pretty easy for those people to find cultural similarities. But it was a good, you know, in those early days, I think we started to establish the rapport of, this is what we do, this is what our culture is, and this is what we stand for. And that, I think, has been the foundation, the backbone. Like what we did back then is the backbone of not only Infusionsoft's culture as it is today, but I think because Infusionsoft was a tech company coming up in a time when tech companies weren't that famous, I think that the culture of Infusionsoft has influenced so many other companies, not only because they've seen what we had, I should say, and then adopted it, but also because as people leave Infusionsoft and propagate onto other companies, they bring these ideas of culture and values and driving forward on what it is that you want to be doing in life to those companies. So I think that was a very important thing. Now, the funny little anecdote is Kyle Levitt, when he served his mission, he also spoke Russian. So I went to Ukraine speaking Russian, so I learned Russian. But beforehand, when he found out I was going there, he was excited. We got really close, because he was like teaching me some Russian words, and he was really excited about it. And then later, a little bit of foreshadowing, after I got back from my mission, after he had left and went to go build Customer Hub with his brother, I ended up working with them more, and a lot of that was because of that connection, and we ended up speaking Russian a lot together, which was a lot of fun. So anywho, that's all that I've got for today. Again, we're barely into 2005 at this point. There's a whole lot more, even in that part, that I want to go back and rehash again on Monday that we'll go through. A lot of really cool things that happened back then, and it's just exciting to think about, like just to go back and think about those experiences. And like I said, when was it? On Wednesday? It is actually quite therapeutic to go back and like close off some of the emotion that I had back then and realize, nope, it was supposed to be that way. It was a good thing. So check out, pay attention later today. You're going to get, I'm going to post that photo, the Papa photo. So hopefully you enjoy that. Go ahead and like that. I'm also on YouTube, by the way. So this is going to be my shameless plug for all the places you can go and listen and see the stuff that I'm talking about. YouTube, check me out there. In fact, if you just go to brettmartineau.com, there's a link to my YouTube channel. You can check out the podcast. The episode was released yesterday. Talks a lot about self-realization and understanding and being aware of what you're really, really bad at. More so even than being aware of what you're good at. Because when you go to those places and you understand what it is that you're bad at, it can help you to create perspective around maybe some of the mistakes that you've made, which is exactly what happened to me. So check that out. The blog is also up. And by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've started being a little bit more prolific, so to speak, in my blogging. So check it out. If you don't fancy listening to me blab for the whole time, after I record this, I'm going to go distill it down into a 750 word, 500 word blog post, which will accompany this, which then gets posted to a bunch of different places. So hopefully you're enjoying the content. If there's anything specific that you feel like you would like me to talk about, I don't know why you would. If there's any stories from back then that anybody that's watching wants me to tell, I'd be happy to do that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go and do some other things. I hope you enjoy your weekend. We'll see you all on Monday. Peace.